Und der kann nicht
Hi everyone, Porterdale back again, and we're here to introduce a special that we did at the Nashville Blackstone Brewing Company. Ooh, I don't know how to say it sometimes. It's Blackstone, but it's the Nashville Brewing Company. Their beers are brewed there too, so it's actually Blackstone, but the thing, you know. So I got to tour there. He unfortunately was not. He's working. We've mentioned this numerous times on the show. If you don't know by now,
I work.
Yeah, we all work.
I job
until we actually have this as a career. You know how this works. But anyway, I got to go by there. Got to talk to the founders. Got to tour the facility and chat it up with them and drink a few beers along the way. So hope you enjoy. Hey guys, Ale here, and I'm standing outside the Blackstone Brewing Company, the oldest craft brewery in Nashville, Tennessee. And what we're going to do is we're going to go inside, take a little tour, talk to the co-founder, Kent Taylor, and also the man responsible for reviving the Nashville Brewing Company brews, Scott Mertie. So let's get inside. This is the lab. This is where all the fun stuff happens, where they make sure it's all good and clean.
This is the poor man's anaerobic chamber here. Those are sachets that you eat up the oxygen in there, so it maintains an oxygen-free environment. To see what grows on a plate that in an anaerobic, oxygen-free environment. And we'll do both aerobic plates and anaerobic plates. And the anaerobics, the ones we're really concerned about, because beer is anaerobic. This is called HLP. This is beer spoiling specific media. It is sensitive to lactobacilli and pediococcus, which are the two main beer spoilers. This will, within probably 3 days, it'll be full of little puffballs and tornadoes, because we know that's what's in here. We're trying to proof the media to make sure that it doesn't end up in a beer sample. Are you guys familiar with diacetyl and what that?
I would say I'm not. No.
What that is? Well, if you ever go to a movie, you walk into a movie theater, what you smell that you think is butter is actually diacetyl.
Buttery. What is that? Why is that there?
It's mixed with oil to simulate the butter.
There's butter.
Again, it's a buttery flavor that can be left over in beer.
It's like they made a stick of butter, then let it sit out over long, and then just mix that with their beer.
Not unusual to find it in some of the shops that are not quite as diligent about what they do. So that's our lab.
That's the lab.
Probably way more information than you wanted.
This is what makes it all work. You know, without this, if it goes down, it all goes down. We don't get beer. That's not good. We want beer. There's where the mash is. That's all the grain.
What they didn't know in the Middle Ages was that boiling beer took out all the contaminants in the water. And when they had the mass plague, those that drank water died, those that drank beer survived.
Fair enough.
So the whole mashing process, from the mash to the boil, can take anywhere. The mashing can take about 3 to 4 hours. The boil will take about 1.5 hours to 2 hours. Then from there it goes in the fermentation tanks. The beer is cooled. Yeast is added, and it sits in there for an ale about 10 days, for a lager 5 to 6 weeks.
Oh, and here's our fancy. Look at the fancy bottle cover that we have. We might want to replace that here before too long. So most of our bottling equipment came from a brewery in Vermont called Magic Hat. Fairly large brewery up there. This is 100 bottles a minute. They were coming into one that bottles 400 bottles a minute. So this actually grabs the bottle, inverts it, sticks a probe up in the bottle, sprays sanitizer so that every bottle gets sanitized. Once the machine gets sanitized and ready to bottle, but the bottle will go on the fill head, which is here. A vacuum will be put on the bottle. Then CO2 will be injected into the bottle, and then that will be vacuumed out. Double pre-evacuation, so vacuum twice. Then CO2, then beer, all at 100 bottles a minute. We leave some air in the beer. We leave some oxygen in the beer. And so eventually that oxygen will stale the beer. Now it'll take between 4 and 6 months depending on the beer, but eventually it will oxidate. Oxidize. And not oxidate.
And some breweries will certainly oxidize much faster than others.
Well, it depends if they
Depending on
have
the quality of the equipment.
if they have a shitty bottling line, yeah. Did that get recorded?
Probably.
Good.
That's fine.
Excellent. So this is beer left over from today's run. So stick that in your pocket if you want.
Guys, we're sitting in the tap room of the Blackstone Brewing Company. I've got with me Scott Mertie and Kent Taylor. He's the co-founder of Blackstone Brewery, and this is the, what would you call you, the founder, not necessarily, but the reviver of the
Nashville Brewing Co.
Brewing Company. Yes. And as you can see, in typical porter and ale fashion, we have beers in front of us that we're going to try with these two guys while I'm, trying to get some information out of them because I want to know some things. So, for starters, we've talked about Blackstone. We're here. You're considered the oldest brewery in Nashville.
We are the oldest brewery in Nashville.
And you started in 1994.
1994 at our brew pub on West End. So we operated a brew pub for about 20 years. And then in 2011, we built this facility. So for about 5 years, we operated 2 breweries in Nashville.
And we actually looked up the history based on what you sent us. The Nashville Brewing Company was an older brewery that used to be here in Nashville, started by German brewers.
Started in 1859 and operated until 1890. And they brewed traditional German lagers. As in fact, Nashville had a pretty large German immigration, and that population they were brewing German beers. But Jacob Stiefel started the Nashville Brewing Company on what is now 6th Avenue South, and brewing German lagers. That they brought those lagers to the United States, and we're brewing them here. And so we revamped the Nashville Brewing Company 2 years ago and brewing lagers in that same tradition.
Now you are kind of a beer historian. I guess it would be the proper term. Now
He is the
beer historian. Just based on the time that we spoke before we got on camera, we learned a lot. So we can attest to that. So what actually got you into that? I mean, what just really drove you to be a beer historian?
Well, it started long before I ever drank beer. I started collecting beer cans when I was 6 years old. So I was collecting beer cans from all over the United States. My dad was traveling internationally and bringing back cans. And so I had all these beer cans from all over the world, and that's what got me interested in learning about the different styles, and actually how I learned geography. Was learning about these beers and where they were brewed, and from there I got into home brewing when I was latter part of high school and into college, which made me pretty popular. And I later moved to Nashville and ended up meeting Kent and Stephanie that had started Blackstone, and got to know them through the Nashville homebrew community. And they had started Blackstone, and they were fortunate to take me under their wing, and whenever I needed yeast or any advice on how to homebrew, they were very eager to provide that information. That's really what got me into the brewing process and learning about that. But as far as the history, that came from a collection standpoint. Moving to Nashville, I just kept wanting to learn more and more about Nashville's brewing history. And that's what ultimately led me into learning more about the original Nashville Brewing Company and what brought us to this day and reviving the brand.
So what was it about the Nashville Brewing Company that just made you want to revive it? Like, what was it about that particular recipe beyond all else?
Well, they were really the first production brewery in Nashville. Prior to that, there were breweries in Nashville and throughout the United States that just truly brewed at their location. They weren't distributing beer at all. But in Nashville, in the South, there really wasn't a large production.
Most of them were in people's homes.
Exactly.
In basements. And what impressed me when Scott was telling me the story about the Nashville Brewing Company is that Stiefel built it as a purpose. I mean, the building was built as a brewery. Everything was done as a brewery as opposed to just in somebody's basement.
And the picture on the label of the Nashville lager is an actual photograph of the brewery as it looked like in the 1880s. And it was originally built in 1859. But that's how it looked, and so we utilize that on our label.
So the collaboration, like, what made you agree to this, considering that Blackstone's better known for ales?
I think agree is probably a more aggressive term than I would say.
Certainly.
We reluctantly complied.
Okay.
And I accused Stephanie of being a lager lover, closet lager lover. I mean, honestly, what piqued my interest was the fact that our brew house was manufactured in Germany. It was really manufactured to brew German lager, and we had only brewed ales up to that point. And so it was more of a challenge than anything else, and being able to use this equipment that we bought that we weren't using the way it was designed to be used. Lagers are not easy to make. So I mean, to me it was because I'm a technical kind of a person, and for me it was a challenge to see if we could pull it off. So most people think lagers look like this and ales look like this, and that's just couldn't be farther from the truth. The difference between an ale and a lager is the yeast that's used in fermentation. If you take a dark wort, say that's this color here, and you put lager yeast in it, you have a dark, heavy lager. If you take a wort like this, and you put lager yeast in it, you have a light, spritzy lager. If you put ale yeast, you have a light, spritzy ale. So identifying or referring to a beer by the yeast that was used during fermentation tells you very little, if anything, about the beer. And so that's, I think, is a fairly large misconception on most people's part, mostly because of the big boys, the Great American Lager, and this is what it looks like, so that's what lagers must be.
Yeah.
And I know that you know this, but some of your listeners may not know exactly the difference. And one thing that I'd love to point out now is that these two beers historically, this is a Helles style beer from Bavaria, or I'm talking about the origin of where the beer came from, the history of it. Historically, it came from Bavaria, southern part of Germany. This is a kolsch, which is from Cologne, Germany, historically from Cologne, Germany. And these two beers are very similar, except for this ale yeast is used in a kolsch and lager yeast is used in a Helles. And historically, the way that what happened was that the brewers in Cologne decided that they wanted to own the word kolsch, and that you could only make a kolsch if your brewery was in the city limits of Cologne. So basically, that's how the Helles style came to be, is to compete with the kolsch. They chose lager yeast, very similar recipes. Kolsch typically has a few more IBUs of bitterness, but the grain bills are identical.
Well, let's try some of these beers. So this is the Nashville Original Lager from the Nashville Brewing Company. Now this is the Chaser Pale from Blackstone. They're supposed to taste the same. Let's see if they...
I never said they were supposed to taste the same.
Taste similar.
Similar. There are slight differences between what lager yeast, what's left over from lager yeast fermentation, what's left over from ale fermentation. Lager yeast is fairly one-dimensional. The only thing that you expect left out of a lager fermentation is sulfur. If you'll notice, you'll pick up a little bit of that sulfury character. Shouldn't be very strong. If it's very strong, it's not made well.
The sulfur taste that you were talking about.
Could you pick a little bit of that?
A hint of it, like
it
right
should
at
only
the
be
end.
a hint.
It's
It
just,
should only be a hint.
I mean,
yeah.
once you kind of point it out, you're
Right,
looking for
right.
it, and then
You might not recognize it if I didn't point it out.
Exactly.
Right. Ale fermentation, you get more fruitiness. I prefer wort fermented with ale yeast because I think it's a little more interesting.
it does have the
Fruitiness.
fruitier notes to it. Yeah.
You can almost pick up a little breadiness to this versus this, even though it's got the same malt in it. But it just comes through just a little bit different.
And it's very interesting to have, again, we're not saying they're identical, but you have two very
Very
similar beers and you can taste differences, subtle differences. This is where having a good palate for beer comes in handy. This next one here, this is
Another dang lager.
This is the Nashville Amber.
Nashville Amber, okay. And this is a lager.
We call it a pre-prohibition style lager.
Right.
So it's got Vienna malt
Right.
in there as well, which gives it a more amber color, a little darker color to it.
This has got kiln malt in it where this does not.
Definitely got, a lot of malt.
It's got a lot of malt backbone in it.
Kind of sweet.
That kilning process will caramelize some of the sugars, and so that will create a little bit of sweetness that doesn't get fermented out. And that was a process. That's how. Now I don't know historically which came first. Do you know? Was it the Vienna style or the Helles
I think
style?
the Vienna style.
I'm thinking you're right.
Helles kind of came after.
Kind of came a little later, really as a competition, specifically to compete with the kolsch.
Right.
But this developed because of that of the kilning process that was developed and the flavors that were created during the kilning.
Mm-hmm. Next we have, this is not the special one, this is the St. Charles Porter. Correct. Now this is your most award-winning beer that you have.
Correct.
This is the one you're known for, I guess.
I would say that's probably correct. And this is a brown porter. In competition, there's two different porter categories.
Okay.
There's brown porter and robust porter.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't have the level of roastiness that a robust porter has. So the roasted, it has a little bit of that, but not as much as a robust porter.
Sure. Now, how many awards has this beer won? Do you not know how many?
I know it's
won eight.
I know it's 8 GABF.
GABF, the 2 World Beer.
Great American Beer Festival. Yeah, it currently leads the category. I mean, there's not another brown porter that's won that many medals.
So what do you think the secret is that you've just kind of figured out the winning combo here?
Not really. We're a brewery that brews to style, and so this, the brown porter really has its roots in the London porters from back in the 1700s. And when this was one of my homebrew recipes, and I designed this beer. And I was going after those London porters.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I'm going to give this a little whirl.
So the flavor it should be very round and well balanced. There's not really anything that sticks out over and above another flavor.
I mean, there are a lot of flavors, but like you said,
Tons of flavors.
You can't really nail it down because one minute you're kind of getting a roasty flavor, the next minute you're kind of getting a malty flavor. It's just it's swirling around.
There's some dried fruit flavors in there. Raisin, one of the malts that we used in it has kind of a raisin character. But again, we didn't brew to win medals. We brewed to make good beer.
Yeah, it just happenstance.
It just was nice. And even to be honest with you, when I made it as a home brew, the first time I tasted it, just blew me away. Absolutely blew me away. It just it's like a blind hog finding an acorn. I just got lucky.
Now the next one we have here is an IPA. This is a Resilience IPA, but it's not your recipe. That's correct.
That is correct.
Okay.
Sierra Nevada, if it hadn't have been for the river where their brewery is, their brewery would have burned. Several of their employees lost their homes. I don't believe anybody was injured that worked for them, but certainly their customers, neighbors, people lost their lives, and so it was very personal to them. And so that they decided to develop a beer where if you wanted to participate, you had to agree that 100% of the gross proceeds were donated to the campfire relief effort. Because of our size, we had to do it on our little bitty system or not at all, just because we couldn't get rid of that much beer. And so what we did is attempted to enlist other brewers to participate in this, and it was very successful. We had 30 breweries from across Tennessee, all the way from way east to way west. So 30 breweries across Tennessee got a piece of this beer, and they'll serve it in their tap rooms as the Resilience IPA, raising money for this. So we were able to raise significantly more money as a group effort through the Tennessee Craft Brewers Guild as a joint effort than any of us could have done on our own. So it really worked out just beyond expectations.
Well, if you happen to be in Tennessee, you want to find a Resilience IPA, go out there and buy one and help donate. So it's an IPA, people. I don't know what more I can say. They're hoppy, they're bitter. If that's your thing, I like them. And finally, we have, this is the
Black Belle.
The Black Belle.
Imperial Stout.
Imperial Stout.
It's a bourbon barrel aged Imperial Stout. It's a very big beer. You can smell the bourbon. I think it's probably the best beer we make. But it's a very small number of people appreciate.
13.2%.
It's a big beer. It's a big beer.
13.2.
I don't know what it is. It's a big beer.
Now,
Just say it's a big beer.
Now we've had these heavier, thicker beers on the show before. You can smell it; it's there.
Greenbrier Distillery, local distillery, makes a beer called Belle Bourbon, and we actually pick up their barrels the day that they dump them, and put this beer in those barrels, very fresh. I mean, they're hours old when the beer goes in. It really makes a difference being able to have that resource.
It's really good. The bourbon's really what's going to catch your eye, but then there's a creaminess to it. Very sweet, chocolatey.
A little bit.
Yeah.
It's got some roasted malt that has some chocolate characters to it. Absolutely.
Very good. Definitely not something you're going to chug. So, is there anything that you guys are actually working on right now, as far as maybe not something you're working on out here that you're wanting to do, but is there any kind of beers that you're wanting to try to possibly experiment with? Maybe not crazy experimentations like Dogfish Head, you know what I'm talking about. But I just mean, just something you haven't done before, but it's maybe something in the back of your head that you're just like, I would really like to try that.
Yes.
Is it
always shit we're working on.
Is there anything that you can share?
No, not really.
See, I tried. What about you? Any kind of lagers that?
I'm definitely a traditionalist. I'm very true to style, and being a lager guy, I'm very true for the most part to Germany and the Czech Republic. I think I mentioned earlier, prior to we were on camera, Chase, Kent's partner at Blackstone, I did a Rosh beer last winter. Just a very small batch. A Rosh beer. Kent hates smoked beers. For those that don't know, Rosh is German for smoked, but it's a smoked lager where the grains are actually smoked prior to the brewing process, and it gives it a whole another level of characteristic to the beer. I think they're fantastic, traditionally from Bamberg, Germany, and so I think Chase and I are going to do that again this winter.
Excellent. I'm definitely going to have to check that out, because I've had a few, and some are really good, and some take it too far. I think the last one that I had was a Sam Adams special limited brew that they had, and it smelled like they stuck it into a smoker for 12 hours and then served it into a glass. It was too much.
Very smoky.
Wow.
I will tell you right now, this is not a beer for me.
Guys, I appreciate you letting us be here.
Absolutely.
Thank you for coming.
This is it, guys. We're at the Blackstone Brewery. If you're ever in Nashville, there's the address right here at the doobly-doo or somewhere on the screen. You know how it works here. But come check them out if you're ever in town. Please come support these guys. Tell them Porter and Ale sent you.
Cheers.
But wait, there's more!
So, in typical Porter and Ale fashion, we have a Das Boot. This is much larger than what we normally have. Plus, we're just sampling the samples. So this is going to be easy, right? But Scott decided to stick around. Kent decided to leave because I guess it was too much of an abomination for him. So I understand. We've said that before. So, cheers.
Roast.
This is not going to happen. bad as some of the ones we've had, but it
Black Belle Bourbon's gonna kick in a second.
It will. I've got to go home. But hey, look, we did it down Butte. So, I'm gonna just go get it out of the system. Bye, guys.
Good job.